1885 photo uncovered, and curators are left stunned after zooming in on one of the friends. The image arrived at the Charleston Museum of Southern History inside a climate-controlled shipping container, part of a larger estate gift from the descendants of the Thornton family. The collection contained furniture, silverware, journals, and numerous photographs documenting one of Charleston's oldest and most affluent families. Dr. Michael Harrison, the museum's chief curator, had been cataloging the materials for 3 weeks when he stumbled upon the image that would alter everything. It was a formal portrait, remarkably well preserved despite its age. 2 young women, both around 16 years old, sat side by side in an elegantly decorated room. Heavy velvet curtains framed a window behind them. Intricate wallpaper covered the walls. The girls occupied matching Victorian chairs with carved mahogany frames and plush upholstery. Both wore costly dresses, layers of silk and lace, high collars, fitted bodices, and full skirts that pooled around their feet. Their hair was elaborately styled, pinned up with ribbons and small flowers. One girl was white, with pale skin and light brown hair. The other was black, her darker complexion sharply contrasting with the white lace at her collar and cuffs. What immediately struck Michael was the apparent equality in the composition. The photographer had placed them at the same height in identical chairs, wearing similarly expensive attire. Their postures mirrored one another. Backs straight, hands folded in their laps, slight smiles on their faces. In an era when racial hierarchy was brutally enforced through law and custom, this photograph seemed to depict genuine friendship, even equality. A small note card attached to the frame read, "Miss Catherine Thornton and friend, Charleston, South Carolina, 1885. Michael examined the image more carefully. The date troubled him. This was 1885, 2 decades after the Civil War ended and slavery was abolished, but also during the period when Jim Crow laws were tightening across the South. Interracial friendship, especially between young women of apparently similar social standing, would have been highly unusual, even scandalous, in Charleston society. He photographed the image with his high-resolution camera and uploaded it to his computer. As the file loaded, he began zooming in, inspecting details invisible to the naked eye. He started with the white girl, Catherine Thornton. Her expression was relaxed and confident. Her hands rested easily in her lap. Her dress displayed intricate embroidery, likely custom-made. Then he zoomed in on the black girl, and his breath caught in his throat. Under magnification, subtle details emerged that transformed Michael's understanding of the photograph. He began with the young woman's face. Her smile, which had seemed genuine at first glance, appeared strained under closer examination. Her jaw was slightly tense, her eyes not quite focused on the camera, but looking past it, as if at someone standing behind the photographer. Michael zoomed in further on her hands, folded primly in her lap, just like Catherine's. But there was a crucial difference. Her knuckles were white with tension, gripping each other with visible force. The relaxed pose was an illusion. Her entire body was rigid with strain. Then he noticed her wrists. The dress sleeves ended in delicate lace cuffs that covered most of her forearms. But where the fabric pulled back slightly, Michael could discern faint marks, discoloration that might have been bruising or scarring. He enhanced the image, adjusting contrast and brightness. The marks became clearer, circular patterns consistent with restraints worn over extended periods. He moved his examination to her posture. While Catherine sat with easy confidence, leaning slightly back in her chair, the black girl sat perfectly upright, almost rigid. Her feet positioned precisely together, her spine straight as a board. This wasn't the posture of someone comfortable and relaxed. It was the posture of someone who had been trained to sit exactly this way. who feared the consequences of slouching or moving. Michael zoomed in on the background details. The room was clearly part of a wealthy home. Expensive furniture, fine curtains, decorative objects visible on shelves. But something about the way the black girl related to this space seemed off. She sat in the chair, as if perched on its edge, not settled into it. Her body language suggested she didn't belong there, despite the expensive dress she wore. He examined her dress more closely. While it was indeed made of fine fabric and appeared costly, it was slightly different from Catherine's. The cut was simpler, the embroidery less elaborate. More significantly, the dress didn't quite fit properly. The sleeves were slightly too long, the bodice a bit loose. It looked like a dress made for someone else, altered to fit her. Michael sat back from his screen, his mind racing. Something was very wrong with this photograph. The apparent equality was a carefully constructed illusion. But what exactly was he seeing? What was the relationship between these two girls? Michael began his investigation by researching the Thornton family. Charleston's Historical Society had extensive records on the city's prominent families, and the Thorntons were among the most thoroughly documented. They had been wealthy plantation owners before the Civil War, enslaving over 200 people on their rice and cotton plantations outside Charleston. After the war, the family's wealth had diminished but not disappeared. They had sold their plantations and moved into Charleston proper, investing in shipping, banking, and real estate. By 1885, they remained one of the city's most influential families, residing in a mansion on Meeting Street. The 1880 census listed the Thornton household: Richard Thornton, age 48, banker, his wife Margaret, age 45, their daughter Catherine, age 11, their son William, age 9, and 3 servants, all black women, listed by name but with no ages or other details provided. Michael found Catherine's name in other records. She had married in 1892 to a lawyer from a similarly wealthy Charleston family. She had died in 1943 at age 70, a respected member of Charleston society involved in various charitable organizations. But there was no mention anywhere of a black friend. No other photographs showing interracial companionship. Nothing that explained the 1885 portrait. Michael needed to find out who the other girl was and why she had been photographed alongside Catherine in such an unusual way. He returned to the estate donation records. Among the materials the Thornton descendants had given the museum was a collection of household account books from the 1880s and 1890s. Michael began going through them, searching for any mention of a young black woman or girl in the household. Most entries were mundane: expenses for food, clothing, household supplies, servants' wages. But then in an account book from 1883, he found an entry that made him pause. Expenses for Rose's upkeep, clothing 12, shoes 3, stores of medical care 5. Rose, a name, finally. But upkeep was an unusual word choice, not wages or salary, but upkeep. The same term used for maintaining property or livestock. Michael searched for more references to Rose in the account books. They appeared regularly, always listing expenses but never wages. In 1884, Rose's winter coat 8 point. In 1885, Rose's books and lessons 6 died. In 1886, Rose's medical treatment a 15. The pattern became clear. The Thorntons were spending money on Rose for clothing, education, and medical care, but they weren't paying her. She wasn't an employee. So what was she? Michael's next breakthrough came from the Charleston County Courthouse archives. He was searching for any legal documents that might mention Rose or explain her relationship to the Thornton family. After days of reviewing records, he found a document dated 1870 that made his stomach turn. It was labeled Informal Adoption Agreement and was handwritten on Thornton family letterhead. The document stated that Margaret Thornton had agreed to take into her household and provide Christian upbringing for a Negro child, approximately 1 year of age, orphaned and in need of charitable care. The child's name was listed as Rose, no surname provided. The document continued, "Said child shall be raised within the Thornton household, provided with food, shelter, clothing, and basic education suitable to her station. In exchange, the child shall assist with household duties as she becomes able, and shall remain under the care and authority of the Thornton family until such time as she is deemed prepared for independent life." Michael read the document 3 times, anger building with each reading. This wasn't an adoption in any legal sense. There were no adoption laws in South Carolina in 1870 that would have recognized a black child as equal to white children in a family. This was something else entirely. A contract that gave the Thorntons complete control over a child's life under the guise of charity. The document had no signatures from Rose's biological family, no indication of their consent or even their identity. Just Margaret Thornton's signature, and the witness signatures of 2 other prominent Charleston white families. Michael searched for Rose's origins. Birth records for black children in South Carolina in the 1860s were sparse and often incomplete, especially during and immediately after the Civil War. But he found a possible match, a burial record from 1869 for a woman named Sarah, approximately 25, described as formerly enslaved, who died in childbirth. A note indicated she left behind an infant daughter. If this was Rose's mother, then Rose had been born into freedom, but only technically. At 1 year old, she had been taken into the Thornton household, and from that moment forward, she had never truly been free. Michael discovered more documents, but revealed the scope of this practice. Throughout the 1870s and 1880s, wealthy white families in Charleston and across the South had engaged in similar informal adoptions of black children. The practice was presented publicly as charity, as evidence of white benevolence toward the freed black population. Churches praised families who rescued orphaned black children. Newspapers ran stories about the Christian duty of caring for less fortunate races. But the reality, as Michael's research revealed, was far darker. These children were not adopted as family members. They were raised as permanent servants, trained from infancy to serve the household. They were fed, clothed, and sometimes educated, but only enough to make them more useful. They received no wages, had no legal rights, could not leave, and were often worked harder than paid servants because the family had no financial incentive to limit their labor. It was slavery by another name, continuing decades after emancipation, hidden behind a facade of charity and Christian benevolence. To understand Rose's experience, Michael searched for diaries, letters, and household records that might document daily life in the Thornton home. He found Margaret Thornton's personal diary, covering the years 1880 to 1895, preserved in the family papers. The diary entries were revealing in what they casually disclosed about Rose's role in the household. Margaret wrote about Rose the way one might write about a favored pet, with affection, but never with respect for her autonomy or humanity. An entry from January 1881. Rose is becoming quite skilled with needlework. I have her mending Catherine's dresses and embroidering linens. She works quickly and rarely needs correction anymore. She will be a valuable help to Catherine when Catherine establishes her own household someday. March 1883. Rose accompanied us to church today. Several ladies complimented me on how well-dressed and well-mannered she is. I explained that we consider it our Christian duty to raise her properly, to show her the correct way to live. Mrs. Patterson said I'm doing God's work. It is gratifying to receive such recognition. July 1884. Rose asked permission to attend a church social organized by the Negro community. I refused, of course. It is not appropriate for her to mix with those people. She has been raised in a refined household and must maintain standards befitting her upbringing here. She accepted my decision with appropriate humility. Michael found the language chilling. Margaret genuinely seemed to believe she was doing Rose a favor, elevating her above other black people, when in reality, she was keeping Rose isolated and controlled. As Rose grew older, the diary entries became more specific about her duties. By age 14, she was responsible for helping Catherine dress, styling her hair, maintaining her wardrobe, serving at family meals, cleaning Catherine's room, running errands, and accompanying Catherine on social calls as her attendant. An entry from 1885, the year of the photograph. Catherine and Rose have grown quite close. Catherine treats Rose almost as a sister, confiding in her, asking her advice on matters of dress and deportment. I'm pleased Catherine shows such Christian kindness. Of course, Rose understands her place and never presumes beyond it. Michael recognized the dynamic. Catherine could afford to be kind to Rose because the fundamental inequality was so firmly established. Rose had no choice but to listen, to serve, to perform friendship while having no power in the relationship. He found another document that shed light on the photograph itself. Receipt from a Charleston photography studio dated April 1885, billing Richard Thornton for 2 portrait sittings, formal composition, fine paper prints. The photographer's notes, preserved with the receipt, mentioned portrait of Mr. Thornton's daughter with household companion. Client requested positioning to demonstrate harmonious household relations. The photograph wasn't documenting a genuine friendship. It was staged propaganda meant to show the Thorntons as benevolent, progressive people who treated their black ward almost as an equal, when the reality was continued bondage. Michael knew he needed to find Rose's own perspective, her own voice, if it existed anywhere. The Thornton family records only showed how they viewed her. As a charity case, a servant, a project. But what had Rose herself thought and felt during those years? His breakthrough came from an unexpected source. While researching abolitionist and civil rights organizations active in Charleston during the 1880s and 1890s, he discovered references to a safe house network that helped black domestic workers escape exploitative situations. One organization, the Charleston Freedmen's Aid Society, had kept detailed records of the people they assisted. In the society's archives, preserved at the South Carolina Historical Society, Michael found a file labeled Rose T. Assisted 1903. Inside was a handwritten account taken down by a society volunteer of Rose's 18 years in the Thornton household. The account began, "My name is Rose. I do not have a family name that I know. The Thorntons never gave me one, and I was too young when I came to them to remember if I had one before. I'm writing this down because I want someone to know the truth of what happened to me, even though I am too afraid to speak publicly about it." Michael read with growing emotion as Rose described her life. She had no memory of her mother or her infancy. Her earliest memories were of the Thornton household, of being perhaps 3 or 4 years old, already being taught to fetch things, to be quiet, to obey instantly. "Mrs. Thornton told me I should be grateful," Rose wrote. She said, "I had been saved from a life of poverty and ignorance." She said Negro children like me usually grew up in filth and sin, but she had rescued me and was raising me to be better. I believed her for years. I thought I was lucky. Rose described her education. She had been taught to read and write, but only enough to read recipes, shopping lists, and simple instructions. She was taught arithmetic sufficient for household accounts. She learned fine needlework, cooking, cleaning, and all the skills necessary to run an upper-class household. But she was never taught history beyond Bible stories, never exposed to literature or ideas that might give her a broader understanding of the world. I thought all Negro people lived like me, Rose wrote. I thought we all lived in white households, serving white families, grateful for their care. It wasn't until I was about 12 that I began to understand this wasn't true, that there were Negro people who worked for wages, who had their own homes and families. But Mrs. Thornton said those people were different from me, that I had been raised better, that I belonged with them. Rose described the psychological isolation. She was not allowed to form friendships with other black people. On the rare occasions when she encountered other black domestic workers, she was forbidden from speaking to them beyond brief, polite greetings. She attended church with the family, but sat in a separate section. Not with the white family, but also not with the black congregation. Miss Catherine was kind to me, Rose wrote, but it was the kindness of an owner to a favored pet. She liked having me brush her hair and listen to her talk about her suitors and her plans. She gave me her old dresses and sometimes shared her desserts with me. She thought this made us friends, but friends can leave each other's company. I could not. Rose's account included specific details about the day the photograph was taken. Reading it, Michael finally understood the full context of the image he had been studying for weeks. In April of 1885, Mrs. Thornton decided she wanted a portrait made of Miss Catherine with me, Rose wrote. She said it would demonstrate the family's progressive views and Christian charity. She had me fitted for a new dress. Not as fine as Miss Catherine's, but finer than anything I usually wore. She had my hair arranged by the same woman who did Miss Catherine's. Rose described being brought to the photography studio, a place she had never been before. The photographer positioned them in the chairs, adjusting their poses repeatedly. He kept telling me to smile, Rose wrote, to look happy and comfortable. Mrs. Thornton stood behind him watching me, and I knew I had to do exactly as instructed. I had learned long ago what happened when I failed to please. What happened when she failed to please was documented elsewhere in Rose's account. Punishments that ranged from withheld meals to being confined to her small attic room for days, to physical discipline that Mrs. Thornton justified as necessary correction for a child of inferior race who needed firm guidance. I sat in that chair, Rose continued, wearing a dress I would never wear again, sitting next to Miss Catherine as if we were equals, as if I had any choice in being there, and I smiled. I smiled because I was afraid. I smiled because I had been told to smile. I smiled because I knew the photograph was meant to make the Thorntons look good, and my role was always to make them look good. Rose described what happened after the photograph was taken. The dress was put away. She returned to her regular clothes and regular duties. The photograph was displayed in the Thornton parlor, where visitors would comment on the family's benevolence. They would say how fortunate I was, Rose wrote. How blessed to be raised by such good people. And I would stand there serving tea, saying nothing, screaming inside. Michael found corroborating evidence in Margaret Thornton's diary, an entry from May 1885. The portrait of Catherine and Rose turned out beautifully. I am having copies made to send to family members. It perfectly captures our household's harmonious nature and our commitment to uplifting the Negro race through proper guidance. The photograph had been used as propaganda, circulated among the Thorntons' social circle as evidence of their virtue, and Rose had been forced to participate in creating an image that contradicted every truth of her daily existence. Rose's account revealed another painful detail. Sometimes Miss Catherine would show me the photograph and say how nice we looked together, how much she treasured our friendship. She truly believed it. She believed I was happy, that I loved her like a sister. She could not see, or did not want to see, that I had no choice in any of it. Rose's account detailed how her understanding of her situation evolved as she grew older. By her late teens, she had begun to realize that her life in the Thornton household was not normal, not acceptable, not something she had to accept forever. "I started paying attention when we went to the market," she wrote. "I would watch Negro women who worked as vendors or laundresses. They seemed tired. Their work was hard, but they could go home at the end of the day. They could keep their wages. They could make choices. I had nice clothes and ate well, but I was never free, not for even a moment." In 1898, when Rose was approximately 29 years old, she began planning her escape. It took her 5 years of careful preparation. She had to do it secretly, saving small coins when she was sent on errands, hiding them in a tier in her mattress. She had to gather information about where she could go, who might help her, all while maintaining her role as the grateful, obedient ward. "The Freedmen's Aid Society became aware of my situation through one of their volunteers who attended the same church," Rose explained. "She noticed how I was treated, how I was kept separate from other Negro people, how I never seemed to have any money of my own despite living in a wealthy household. She approached me carefully one day at the market and asked if I wanted help. I was terrified to say yes. Terrified of what would happen if I was caught planning to leave, but I was more terrified of spending the rest of my life in that house." The society helped Rose plan her escape. They arranged for her to be taken in by a black family in Philadelphia who needed help with their boarding house. Real employment with wages and free time. They helped her obtain a train ticket. They coached her on what to say if she was stopped and questioned. "The night I left was in November 1903, Rose wrote. "The family had gone to a dinner party. I was supposed to wait up to help Miss Catherine undress when they returned. Instead, I took the small bag I had packed and hidden, and I walked out the front door. I had lived in that house for 33 years, and I had never once walked out the door of my own free will." Rose described the terror of that night, convinced at every moment that she would be caught, that the police would be summoned, that she would be dragged back. "I did not know if what I was doing was legal or illegal," she wrote. "I was not enslaved in the legal sense. Slavery had been abolished, but I had no papers, no legal standing. I did not know if the Thorntons could claim I owed them something, could have me arrested for leaving." She made it to the train station with the help of the society volunteers. She boarded the train to Philadelphia. "When the train started moving," she wrote, "I finally believed I might actually escape, and I began to cry. Years of held tears, all coming out at once." Michael traced Rosie's life after her escape through records in Philadelphia. She had indeed worked at a boarding house run by the Williams family, respectable members of Philadelphia's black community, who were active in helping Southern black migrants establish themselves in the city. Rose had lived and worked there for several years, receiving wages for the first time in her life. She had learned what it meant to have free time, to make her own choices about how to spend her earnings, to come and go as she pleased. In 1907, she had married a man named James, a porter who worked for the railroad. They had 2 children, a son born in 1908 and a daughter in 1910. Rose had worked as a seamstress from her home, using the skills Mrs. Thornton had taught her, but now for her own profit, for her own family's benefit. Michael found Rose's death certificate. She had died in 1952 at age 83, having lived almost 50 years in freedom. She was buried in Eden Cemetery in Philadelphia, a historic African-American cemetery. Her headstone was simple: Rose Williams, 1869-1952. Beloved wife and mother. But Michael wanted to know if Rose had ever spoken publicly about her experience. He searched through Philadelphia newspapers, civil rights organization records, and archives of black community institutions. What he found surprised him. Rose had become quietly active in efforts to expose ongoing exploitation of black domestic workers. She had given testimony to the NAACP in 1919 about informal adoption practices in the South. Her testimony, preserved in the organization's archives, described her experience and warned that the practice was continuing, that black children were still being taken into white households under the guise of charity and raised as unpaid servants. "I am speaking out now," her testimony stated, "because I am safe here in Philadelphia, because enough time has passed that I am less afraid of retaliation. But there are children still living as I lived, still being told they should be grateful, still being deprived of their freedom, while the families that hold them are praised for their generosity. This must be exposed. This must end." Michael discovered that Rose had never returned to Charleston, never confronted the Thorntons directly. But she had told her story to her children and grandchildren, making sure they understood where she had come from and what she had survived. He managed to locate one of Rose's great-granddaughters, a woman named Diana, living in Washington, D.C. When he called to explain what he had found, Diana was silent for a long moment. "I grew up hearing grandmother's stories about Grandma Rose," Diana finally said, "and about how she had escaped from people who kept her like a slave, even though slavery was supposed to be over. We always wondered if it was entirely true, or if maybe the stories had gotten exaggerated over time. Do you have proof?" "I have the photograph," Michael said. "I have the Thornton family records. I have Rose's own written account. It's all true." Diana agreed to come to Charleston to see the evidence. When she arrived at the museum a week later, Michael showed her everything. The photograph, the adoption papers, Margaret Thornton's diary, Rose's testimony. Diana stood before the enlarged photograph for a long time, studying her great-great-grandmother's face. "You can see it now that you know," she said quietly. The fear in her eyes, the tension in her body. She's not smiling. She's performing. Because she had to. Michael spent 6 months developing an exhibition around the photograph and Rose's story. He titled it, "The Illusion of Kinness: Slavery's Legacy in Post-Emancipation America." The photograph would serve as the centerpiece, but the exhibition would expose the broader practice of informal adoption and domestic servitude that had trapped thousands of black children in the decades after the Civil War. The exhibition opened in September 2024. Media coverage was immediate and intense. The photograph itself was striking. 2 young women appearing as friends, one secretly imprisoned by the other's family. The contrast between the image's apparent message and its true meaning made for powerful storytelling. But the exhibition went beyond this single story. Michael and his team had researched similar cases throughout the South. They found dozens of documented instances of black children taken into white households under charity pretenses and raised as unpaid servants. They found court cases from the early 20th century where black adults had sued for back wages from families that had adopted them as children. They found newspaper articles from black-owned papers that had tried to expose the practice only to be ignored by white-controlled media. The exhibition included interactive elements that helped visitors understand the psychological manipulation involved. One display asked visitors to imagine being told from infancy that they should be grateful for their circumstances, that they were being saved from a worse fate, that their unpaid labor was a fair exchange for food and shelter. How would that shape a child's understanding of their own worth and rights? Diana attended the opening with several other descendants of Rose. They stood together before the photograph, and Deanna spoke to the assembled crowd about her great-grandmother's legacy. Rose survived. Deanna said. She escaped, built a life, raised a family. But she carried the trauma of those 33 years for the rest of her life. She had nightmares about being dragged back to Charleston. She struggled to trust white people, even when they were genuinely kind. She had difficulty accepting help because she had learned that white help always came with chains attached. The exhibition sparked important conversations about the long shadow of slavery. Even after legal emancipation, systems of control and exploitation had persisted, adapted, found new forms. The photograph became a symbol of how appearances could deceive, how claims of benevolence could mask cruelty, how racism could disguise itself as charity. Academic papers were written analyzing the informal adoption practice and its place in the broader history of racial oppression. Genealogists began researching their own family histories, looking for similar cases. Several more photographs were discovered showing black children and teenagers, positioned alongside white families in ways that initially appeared to show integration or equality, but upon investigation revealed exploitation. The Thornton family descendants issued a public statement acknowledging their ancestors' actions. "We cannot undo the harm that was done to Rose." The statement read, "We can only acknowledge it, learn from it, and commit to working against systems of oppression that continue to this day. We are donating a significant sum to organizations that support survivors of human trafficking and domestic servitude in Rose's memory." Michael continued his research, expanding it into a book about post-emancipation servitude practices. But he always returned to that photograph, to Rose's face, to the truth hidden in plain sight. One day, a year after the exhibition opened, a young woman approached him in the museum. She was perhaps 20 years old, a college student studying history. "I saw the exhibition," she said. "I saw Rose's photograph, and I started thinking about my own great-grandmother's story. She was raised by a white family in Mississippi. We always thought she had been adopted, that they had been kind to her. But now I'm wondering if maybe there's more to the story. How would I find out?" Michael helped her begin her research. And as he did, he thought about Rose, about how she had finally spoken her truth, about how that truth was now helping others recognize and name their own family histories. The photograph from 1885 no longer deceived anyone who looked at it. The illusion of friendship had been stripped away, revealing the reality of captivity. Rose's forced smile had become testimony. Her silent suffering had found its voice, and 139 years after that image was created, she was finally free. Not just from the Thornton household, but from the silence that had protected her captors and erased her truth.